To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I hope everybody had a great weekend. Our next order of business is public comment. Is there any public comment? Okay, and then we'll go to the approval of minutes. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to go over these. If so, if I could entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Okay, we have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Like sign opposed. Show the minutes passed. And we will, I guess we've got public comment again. Is that?
Yeah, this one's for the agenda.
For the agenda.
No, it's a typo.
Typo. I was going to say, it seemed like it was a little redundant. Slightly. A lot but we want to hear from you. So if anyone wants to speak, please feel free. We're going to move right into presentations. The federal legislative update. Ms. Egan, would you like to introduce this?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the committee and the public. We are joined today by our federal representatives for lobbying, business development, Holland and Knight, local, and also D.C., to get an update of what has changed and what has not changed since the election, what positions are open, and what opportunities there are for HART, not just to bring more of our federal dollars back home, but to continue to carve out our role as a thought leader with rideshare, dynamic technologies, and autonomous vehicles. So I will turn it over to Carl, Jeff, and Lisa.
Thank you. Carl Koch with Holland & Knight. Joining me today are Lisa Barkovic with Holland & Knight and Jeff Booth with Booth Transit. We're happy to be here today and talk a little bit about what's going on in D.C. We'll start out by saying that clearly everybody reads the newspapers, watches the news, sees what's going on. It's important to remember that everything you see and see and hear there is less than 1% of what's actually happening in Washington right now. As Lisa and Jeff are both going to talk about, the House and the Senate are both moving forward on the appropriations process. The administration is getting its people in place. We are seeing actions from the administration in terms of pushing out awards, pushing out grants, and doing the things that they normally do. That's the part we're working with. We obviously, on behalf of HART, work very closely with the Tampa Bay delegation. Congresswoman Castor and Congressman Ross tend to represent the majority of Hillsborough County and be the two folks that we rely on most for help and support. But Congressman Vern Buchanan now has the south end of the county, and Congressman Bilirakis still has a little part of the northwest corner. So we work with all of them. We work with the entire Tampa Bay delegation on your behalf, as well as other members of the Florida delegation who serve on relevant committees like transportation and appropriations. So having said that, that's kind of an update of where we are on the congressional end. I'll turn it over to Lisa to talk a little bit about what's happening on the appropriations front.
I'll just go ahead. This was just our agenda. On the administration transition, it's been a slow process as President Trump has been making his nominations for the Department of Transportation. So what we have not nominated yet is a federal transit administrator. So we're still waiting on that. But in the meantime, Matt Welbus is serving as the FTA acting administrator, still the executive director. He's been a long-time career staff person at FTA and someone who we continue to work closely with on HART's priorities. And you can see it's just not the FTA that's waiting for someone to have a name. We have Assistant Secretary for Policy, Budget, Aviation. Federal Highway Administrator has yet to be named. Then we have several nominations made but not confirmed yet. Under Secretary for Policy, very important when talking about some of the grant programs that have been coming out of DOT. They can be very instrumental, as well as the Assistant Secretary for Government Affairs. And we have 3 nominated and confirmed, including Secretary Chow, and she has had great staff put in place. And so continue to work forward. We're hearing that maybe more of these nominations will come out, be made in September and October when they come back.
Yeah, we had talked to you early in the year, so when the president's budget came out, there was a fair amount of, shall we say, alarm within the transit world in terms of some of the cuts that were proposed, certainly to the Capital Investment Grants program, also the elimination of the Tiger program. Otherwise, they funded the balance of the transit program and the highway program based on what was in the FAST Act, so they retained those programs and some of the discretionary grant programs they proposed a cut. Then we also saw the House Budget Committee also proposing cuts to the programs across the board. It's more of an effort to try to get support for a budget coming out of the House based on the priorities of the House. So we've seen that come out, and that's also made proposed cuts to the transit program. But as you can see in the table, based on where the House and Senate are, basically the House and Senate did their own thing. And the reality is that the Senate, as the Senate always does, supports the Tiger program. And I would predict today, when conference is all done, there will be a Tiger program, given the fact that the Senate Subcommittee Chair Susan Collins is an enthusiastic supporter of this program. We're going to see the highway and transit programs funded at the FAST Act level. We're going to see funding for the Capital Investment Grants program. Now, what's interesting for you is sort of the autonomous vehicles funding, which is in the House bill. That's going to be interesting to see sort of what happens with that. And I think that's worth monitoring as a reflection of a level of interest in that program. So I think that to me is, I think, worth monitoring and sort of focusing on exactly what they intend or where they want to go with that program and what role that money is going to play to advance autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, so I would say, just building off of where we are in appropriations, before the Congress adjourned for the August break where they return back to their districts to do district work, the House had passed a 4 appropriations minibus bill. They refer to it as the security appropriations bill. So the House went ahead and passed those 4 out of the 12 bills. And now there are plans that when they return to session in September, the House will do an 8-bill omnibus, and this will be the first time where the House has wrapped up all 12 bills before the fiscal deadline of September 30th. And then there are negotiations underway with the Senate to talk about maybe even raising some of the federal funding caps that have been put in place on the Senate side. But the appropriations process is moving, and it might be finished faster than what they did this year when they only wrapped up in May.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is just, how to put this? This is a crucial month. So appropriations gets wrapped up into debt limit. It gets wrapped up into agreeing with the budget resolution that will take us to 18 and possibly 18 and beyond. And so don't be surprised, to Lisa's point, if they decide to raise the caps, that all of a sudden funding coming out of conference is higher than both the House and Senate because of what is necessary to get support to pass those appropriations bills. Because the dynamic of a budget is that the budget only has to be approved by the majority of the House and Senate, and it's not an item that goes to conference, where appropriations bills can be filibustered, which means that in the Senate you need to have 60 votes. And so that will have an effect on the overall numbers about what it takes to get the 60 votes on the funding level for the different appropriations bills, and that will get reflected in the budget caps for 18 and beyond. So don't be surprised if we see some adjustment, and this would not be unprecedented because this has happened before. What comes out of the conference is a higher funding level than what we had going in from the House and Senate, just because of what it takes to get a deal done. So it's September will be an interesting time as all these things hopefully could pass independently, but it would not be beyond the realm of expectation to see that in fact they all collide and we get rolled into a big package. And that would also not be unprecedented because that's happened in previous Congresses. So we'll see what happens there.
And Jeff, in your opinion, what is the status of the omnibus? I mean, this big infrastructure, is that happening or not happening?
Okay, I think the administration is very desirous of it happening. Part of the funding for the package is going to be dependent on the tax bill in terms of where the revenues come. If in fact there's additional revenues, will we fund it through repatriation? How will we adjust the tax code and how those monies get spent? And so I think they're waiting to see what happens with the tax package because it will influence the infrastructure package. But it's important in looking at the infrastructure package to parse what it is and what it isn't. And I say that in that it's represented as $1 trillion package. But the reality is that $800 billion of that is actually leveraging state and local resources. It's not money. It's financing. It's financing through TIFI. It's financing through private activity bonds. It's financing through other tax credit bonds that will benefit transportation infrastructure investment. So the reality is that it relies on state and locals to raise their taxes or identify a funding source to repay the debt. And only $200 million of it is represented as new money. And reality, even of the $200 million in the original proposal, 95 of that is out of the Highway Trust Fund. So 95 billion of that is out of the Highway Trust Fund. So only 105 billion is actually new money. So when we look at the package, we need to really understand, as was proposed by the administration, what it really is. Now, having said that, the president proposes and Congress disposes. And the relevant authorizing committees are beginning to turn their attention to an infrastructure package, and they will carve out their own package. And they will figure out what that package looks like and how much of the administration's package will be included and how much of their priorities will be reflected in that package. So at this point, I think there's a desire to get it done. The president certainly wants it to get it done. It's tax reform and infrastructure is two big priorities right now, and he's pushing hard to try to get those done. So, and I think there's interest in an infrastructure package, and that's probably easier to get done than a tax bill. Because a tax bill is, if you thought healthcare reform was difficult, try to do a tax bill, because of there's so many interest groups who their interests are tied up in a single provision of the tax code. And so trying to pull together a package that can get enough votes and people see the totality of the benefits in the package, even though they may be giving up sort of individual benefits, that's always the challenge in putting together a bill.
They had talked about raising the gas tax. Is that still going to be considered as part of the package?
That's a good question. My observation is that certainly Mitch McConnell, when pushing off raising the gas tax as part of the FAST Act, always held out tax reform as the legislation that he would rely on to advance an increase in the gas tax. I think there's support for doing that, but you haven't seen a lot of verbal support or visible support. But there's a recognition that if you don't do it on this bill, it'll only get more difficult in the future. And so if it's going to happen, it really needs to be part of this overall bill. And then at that point, if some increase in the gas tax or an alternate funding mechanism emerges, when it's put in this overall package, it becomes less visible than standing out by itself as part of a surface transportation reauthorization that will have to happen in 2020. Because at the end of 2020, heading into 2021, the trust fund we fall off a cliff. So something has got to be done in 18, 19, and 20 to deal with surface transportation reauthorization to figure out the financing or the funding for the program, because in the absence of an increase in the gas tax or identifying other monies, we have a $100 billion hole in the funding come 2021. So something has to get done. So to answer your question, I think tax reform gives us the best opportunity to look at sort of how we're going to finance transportation heading into the future.
You probably need the White House's support.
You do, absolutely. I think you need White House support, and you need. No one party's going to walk this plank together. I mean, they got to walk it together. No one party's going to take this issue without some visible support from the other party. It's got to be a bipartisan solution so that everybody walks that together and advances it together, so that it can't be hung around the neck of one party or the other, because the gas tax has always been sort of used that way. So I think it's just got to be part of a bipartisan proposal that everybody buys off on, and they advance it together and support it. So, but I think tax reform is probably our best opportunity to do it. But I would say, just the last thing I'd say about that, but I think there's also recognition in town that the gas tax is not a long-term solution, that there needs to be an alternative being explored. I think there's some interest in looking at what those alternatives are. For all the reasons, CAFE standards, AVs, you name it, there's got to be a way to look at sort of how we finance transportation going forward, because the gas tax is no longer a surrogate for the wear and tear on roads, which it was originally. It's just not anymore. And so looking at sort of what will be the alternatives, I think also a challenge that Congress has got to face of how we're going to finance and fund the programs going forward.
Thank you. Okay. You have more to go?
Just a little bit. So we talked about the infrastructure package. Streamlining is also going to be very much part of that, and figuring out ways where 80% agencies like HART can move faster through the process of there's no reason why you need to do NEPA a couple different times when trying to get a project completed. The other thing to talk about is autonomous vehicles, self-driving vehicles. It's a huge topic right now in Washington. The House is, right before they adjourned at the end of July, the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over autonomous vehicles, they marked up a large package that would be providing a lot more exemptions. Right now, the number is 2,000 that NHTSA can give out, and they're looking to increase that, up to 10,000, 100,000. Thank you. I'm leaving off a zero, but which would allow a lot more people across the country to be applying and doing innovative stuff with AV vehicles. Senate Commerce Committee is looking to also tackle this issue this fall, and Senator Nelson is the ranking member of that committee and can continue to be helpful and find ways for HART to be the thought leader on this section.
The only thing I'll add to that is that who used to think of the traditional auto manufacturers, this bill opens up the possibility for the Googles, Ubers, Lyfts, everybody to get into the AV world, so it's going to be interesting to see where they take it, how long they should survive before they're acquired and begin to consolidate. But this bill really opens the door for just about anybody to get an exemption from the Federal Motor Vehicle Standards. So it'd be interesting to see if this gets passed, sort of where it takes us with respect to AVs and who enters the AV market.
We have a question from Commissioner Kim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask, this jumps back, but on the funding, financing, looking at alternatives to the gas tax, and you said a few are being talked about. Could you share with us just the shortest of outlines about what's under consideration? Or
What, in the infrastructure package or financing or funding for the program going forward? Which one?
Financing and for the program, just the alternative to the gas tax.
The most obvious alternative is VMF or VMT.
VMT.
Thank you. VMT tax that Oregon and some other states have done it. The challenge of VMT tax is how and where to collect it, right? And then there's the worry about people about privacy, about what am I revealing in terms of my personal travel behavior. But my response whenever I hear that argument is always, okay, do you have a cell phone?
Yeah, they're already.
Do you use GPS? Do you use GPS in your car? You gave that up when you got your cell phone or when you used your GPS in your car. So I think it's that information is already out there, and you already have apps right now that can track your miles. If you're a business person and you want to be able to track your miles, there are apps that measure every one of your trips that can tell you, so you can report if you want to take a tax credit for that or tax benefit for that. So I think that ship has already sailed. I think the issue is this collection. Where and how do you collect it? And how often do you collect it? Is it through insurance? Is it at the gas pump with transponders like Oregon did? Or do you have, like with the toll road, where basically you have things that read off of your reader, right? And so as you go down a road, you could see the toll technology being applied to collecting the tax by simply reading off of some app on your or something on your car that measures how far you've driven that car, and will be able to keep track of sort of the miles that you've traveled to be able to tax you. So, I mean, I think the mechanisms are there. It's just disseminating that, and over what period of time will that take place. But I think the options for collection are out there. And so I think that's the challenge is more and more the rural areas where you don't have, where are those collection points in the rural areas? So it's got to work for Wyoming, North Dakota, and South Dakota as much as it works for Florida. And so I think that's one of the challenges with collection is sort of how and where to collect it to prevent evasion, because people are not stupid, and if they know that a road doesn't have a way to collect it, they're going to avoid certain routes if that's the collection mechanism. So I think it's figuring out how to prevent evasion if that's in fact where we're going to go. But I think we'll still have a gas tax. The issue will be supplementing that with some other source over time before we get it fully implemented. But I think that seems to be at this point, the primary alternative is a VMT tax.
Thank you. When you said other alternatives, I couldn't imagine what they would be, but
Yeah,
that's why I wanted to hear.
VMT is probably the leading alternative.
Thank you.
We already talked about some of the deadlines out there. So this is just the outlook. We have tax reform that's going to up on the agenda, the FAA reauthorization, the infrastructure package. And then just going to end quickly on some of the opportunities for HART. We are expecting by the end of the month for the Department of Transportation to release their FY17 NOFA for Tiger, the Notice of Funding Availability. We have been talking to DOT. We do expect some changes in the way the previous NOFAs have been. There's not going to be an emphasis on ladders of opportunity, but still projects that are going to be ready to go and have some type of private sector or P3 type funding component that might be added in, or you might get additional priority if you have that added into your application. Bus facilities, we're working with HART now for an application on a maintenance facility. The low-no bus funding opportunity, the low to no emissions, HART submitted an application the other month for that for CNG buses. Infra, which used to be called the Fast Lane Grant Program. This is a grant program that was created under the FAST Act. That application is open until November 2nd right now. It's for very large freight and highway type of projects. So not sure exactly what might fit there, but something that we continue to look at for HART. And then there might be an opportunity for mobility on demand sandbox funding. This is something that's been new in the past year that can help transit agencies figure out what's a new way to provide service. So very innovative type of ideas that they'll give you money to play in the sandbox for. So that's it. Are there any other questions?
Yes, Ms. Hoogan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may add, we have applied for this year's low and no emission vehicle. One of the things we understood was previous years that the focus was much more strongly on electric vehicles, but there's more love for CNG, and that's obviously where we're going right now. So we did apply for that. We will have an application in for bus facilities as well. And mobility, whether it's an individual app or it's something with our friends at PSTA, we will be in on that one as well.
And the other question I had was, seems like the Premium Transit Plan Group is focusing a lot on BRT and dedicated lanes. Would that be something that could be pursued for dedicated lane projects if we have one?
I mean, these typically bigger projects, they seem to have a freight element to them. So looking at, so would that lane be used for any sort of freight, like a toll lane for freight to sort of expedite freight movement in the corridor? I mean, the issue for then, if you want to chase capital investment grant monies for those projects, is I remember talking to the state DOT when I was down here before the commission or the meeting around the premium study, was talking to them about sort of eligibility under the program. And right now, depending on the capital dollars that are needed for the investment, will then dictate sort of, well, if you can give it dedicated right away and it's dedicated to transit use only during peak hour, then that allows you to go above $300 million for the capital investment. If it shares the lane with a single occupant vehicle, i.e. a toll lane, shares the lane with a freight, then it's not dedicated to transit use during peak hour, and then it's only eligible for small starts, which caps you at $300 million and a cap of $100 million in the federal share. So looking at the corridor and looking at the nature of the investment you want to make will then influence your eligibility for federal dollars through the Federal Transit Administration's Capital Investment Grants Program. So we talked about that, about sort of looking and exploring those alternatives and sort of having those programs in mind based on what your funding need is for the corridor and sort of what your plans are. Because certainly then the way who owns the toll lane, who's the operator, and is it private operators, is it a state who's the operator, will also influence then the use of the lane and the use of the revenues, because the statute allows the toll operator to throw off revenues, and other states are using those toll revenues to finance transit investment. And the biggest issue is if you have a private operator, they have to be paid first and you have to service the debt because they're the operator of the lane. If the state's the owner of the lane, then they get to decide how to use the lane. And so they're more, at least having a better ability to have that conversation about allowing transit and what's transit's fee for accessing the lane, or is there a fee? Because if it's a private operator, they'll see every bus as lost revenue. So understanding those dynamics of the lane and how they approach it, the statute allows you to use those revenues and to finance against those revenues for the investment in the corridor. And as I mentioned to them, I'm working on a project in the Twin Cities, the Orange Line BRT project. And basically what the Orange Line BRT project is a state-owned toll lane that they got a small starts grant to pay for the on and off ramps off of the freeway. So they occupy the shoulder, and then they get on and off, and they use the small start monies to do the on and off ramps to build stations and park and ride lots. But the state owns the corridor, the state owns the road, and they're allowed to use the road, but they're running a bus rapid transit project down the corridor, but they're using small start monies because I think it's $180 million total capital cost for the project. So there are options. I mean, there's plenty of options out there. There's other states that have done similar types of investments. In Colorado, letting it occupy sort of an HOV lane. So there's certainly examples of that, of BRT and freeways that are more and more places are exploring and looking at different mechanisms and ways to finance those investments are certainly out there. So I think there's some examples or prototypes that could be sort of help inform you as you're moving forward and looking at the type of investment you want to make and how to finance and pay for it.
That's great options. So you're continuing to work with the Premium Transit Group?
Yes, I'm a sub to Jacobs on that. And
great. Awesome.
Made sure that I met with the state folks and we sort of planted some seeds there. And we'll sort of see as you progress in sort of identifying the corridors and looking at the investment, that's something to consider as you're...
Because actually the one project you said that you're working on, the small starts, I was thinking of I-75 and Big Bend. That would fit perfectly with what you just said.
So that's why I planted that seed with the FDOT, was to give them some examples to think about, given the interest in looking at some sort of regional BRT system, of looking at some examples out there, because there are some examples out there that you could borrow from to look at different transit corridors and how to leverage that toll lane for the benefit of transit.
That's awesome. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Great presentation. Ms. Egan?
Thank you, ma'am. Along the lines of the regional transit plan, one of the options being discussed for the mode would be autonomous BRTs. Jeff is smiling. So you can just answer it but do we have an example of a project that would be lined up with that? Where on our chart, I mean, are we looking at something that's brand new, autonomous BRT that would be sort of like a hot lane?
Mark and I had this conversation before we stepped up here. Okay, I'm going to express my personal views, which is at this point the AV vehicles that we have typically are lower capacity, lower speed vehicles. We've yet to come to a higher capacity, higher speed vehicle. So if you're going to operate in a freeway, you've got to be able to go at least 55 to 65 miles an hour to operate on that freeway. Otherwise, you're only causing issues. So I think we got to look at where's the market in terms of who's going to come to the market with that vehicle. So I think there are lots of places that are looking. I think Reno did a demonstration, Proterra, around an electric bus that's also AV. So people were putting prototypes out there. We're also working in Jacksonville as they're looking to replace the Skyway, and they're looking for a vehicle that will operate in the dedicated right-of-way and eventually get off of the Skyway into city streets. So I think there are folks who are looking at prototypes and looking at sort of different uses of an AV vehicle. So I would say what we know today is going to be different than what we know 5 years from now. But what vehicles are out there and what role they play in the delivery of transportation services, I'm not sure we fully know yet. Sort of where because I think at the end of the day, the market's going to decide where it wants to go with AVs. I think the marketplace is going to decide. The marketplace is going to drive that, whether that be individual AVs, ownership of AVs, what the marketplace is for transit vehicles and AVs. So at this point, all I know is that those are some of the examples. I'm aware of people who are looking and start testing prototypes. And as we told the Jacksonville folks, that no one yet has applied for a small start grant for an AV. Because the other issue I would say, and I told them, which is that because if you go and get federal dollars for the AV vehicle, it has a useful life, which means that you're running that technology for 8 to 12 years. Okay, given this field and given the evolution of technology, that's going to be a dinosaur 4 or 5 years from now, but you have to run it for 8 to 12 years. So to me, if you're going to look at that, you're going to look at doing some sort of financing through a P3 where you put the risk on the private operator to come in with a new vehicle or take the technology risk rather than you take the technology risk until the marketplace is better defined as to what the technology is actually going to be. So that to me is sort of where we are right now. And at this point, as a public agency, I'd be reluctant to take that technology risk at this point because I have to operate that vehicle for 8 to 12 years if I use federal funds to acquire it. And I'm just not sure that we know enough about the vehicle yet to take that risk until the marketplace is better defined and we know what product's out there and we know the viability of it. We know, because the other issue is going to be, because we've had transit landscape is littered with companies who enter the marketplace, lack financial viability, and disappear. So you're going to, if you buy a vehicle, then the manufacturer goes out of business. Who warranties the vehicle? Who maintains the vehicle? Those are all issues you have to look at as you're heading down that pathway. And so I just say that and that's not to discourage you from doing it, but I just say that we're at the very front end of that technology learning curve and sort of technology implementation. So just those are issues to be thinking about as we're heading down that pathway, to be aware of sort of where we are and when the marketplace is actually going to be defined, so that we temper our enthusiasm with marketplace reality and technology realities about where we are.
Thank you.
Great presentation. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Doing a great job. Okay, our next is the state legislative snapshot and 2018 look ahead, which is coming upon us very quickly as session starts in January this year. Committee meetings start in about a month.
Don't remind me, please. Good morning. It's always nice to come in here following Holiday Night, because I think anytime you hear Jeff speak, I think afterward you feel like you just got a master's class in transit. So I think I get another degree here for that. Good morning. Great to be here again and to present to the committee this year. I just once again want to take the opportunity to thank each of you on the board and the staff here at HART for the opportunity to continue representing you in Tallahassee. We feel over the last several years we've made some real progress and have been able to build some solid relationships on behalf of HART amongst our legislative delegation, as well as staff and the folks at the Florida Department of Transportation. I know you've got a packed agenda today, and I know you had a long meeting on Monday, so I'll try to keep my comments brief and leave it more for questions and discussion at the end. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 2017 session, a little review, talk about FDOT, some changes that have happened at FDOT, as well as some grants that have come through recently. And then finally, we'll end it with a 2018 discussion on potential priorities as we go into session and committee weeks, which start next month. So 2017, I'll keep it brief. I know we're 3 months out from when our session ended. So most of you already know what has happened this past session, so I won't go into too much detail. But obviously, if you have questions, please interrupt me, and I'll try to answer them for you. Starting at a high level, the budget obviously passed this year, $82.4 billion, about on par for where we were last year. Breaking that down even further, if you look at the DOT budget, the FDOT budget, it was about $10.9 billion, which was over $100 million increase from the prior year. So a budget that was almost flat to get more than $100 million in DOT funding was a great thing for a transit agency like HART. Breaking it down even further, and you look at the transit development and grants coming from the legislature this year, the 2017-2018 development grants were about $632 million for transit agencies across the state, and that is about an $80 million increase from the prior year. So I think what we're continuing to see in Tallahassee is an investment in transportation. This governor, this legislature have continued to invest in transportation and transit throughout his time and their time in office. As most of you know, we did have an appropriations request this year, and we were able to get that appropriations request through the legislative process. We were able to get $300,000 for hyperlink expansion, into the budget. Unfortunately, the governor ended up vetoing that money, and just to put it in perspective, he vetoed about $11 billion in total. Now, a lot of that money was education money, which was subsequently put back into the budget during special session. But projects like ours, there was about 400 projects that he vetoed, equaling about $410 million. And so, unfortunately, our $300,000 hyperlink extension was one of those projects that was caught up with the governor's veto pen this year. I can't sit here today, though, and not at least thank our champions and our supporters in the legislature. Representative Toledo, who carried our bill for us, as many of you remember, for appropriations request this year. We actually had to file a bill for an appropriation, and Representative Toledo filed that bill for us and championed that through the House. And Senators Young and Brandis certainly were our champions and our supporters in the Senate and helped guide that funding through that process. So I want to thank each of them for all of their support of HART. Moving on, another year of no merger language, something that we have seen now for the last several years. I think actually outside of our first year representing HART, there has not been a bill nor really a deep dive into merger discussions in Tallahassee. And so, again, I think a lot of the relationships that we have been able to build, the story of HART, talking to members about what good taxpayer dollar, or taxpayer dollar, the stewards of taxpayer dollars, thank you, that HART is and the board is helping our cause in Tallahassee. So that's something else that we did not see this year. As many of you know, the Public Transportation Commission, Representative Grant filed a bill to dissolve that commission, and that did pass and has been signed by the governor. And so as of December 31st this year, the PTC will be no longer. Transportation network companies. This is a bill, the Uber Lyft bill, if you will. This is a bill that has been filed for several years, I think 4 or 5 years now. Always had a problem getting through the legislature, but this past year it did pass the House and the Senate and was signed by the governor. The TNC bill essentially calls for various insurance requirements, background requirements, drug and alcohol policy requirements, and now we actually have a universal framework at the state level for TNCs to be legal in the state. And so what that means is in the future, if HART would like to sign into a P3 with an Uber and Lyft, it should be possible now because of that statewide framework. And then finally, a big bill that we were following for HART this year was the T-BARTA bill. I know you all had discussions about it already and had a vote a couple weeks ago about that bill. Obviously, Representative Rawlerson and Senator Latvala were the sponsors of that bill, and I won't go into too many details because I know you all talked about it. But name change from transportation to transit, changes the member counties, essentially removing Citrus and Sarasota. The board makeup has changed, and we'll have various representatives on that board, including one from HART. We actually expect, or we've heard, that the governor may be appointing his members to that board as soon as this week. So we will be keeping an eye out if and when that happens this week, and we'll obviously report that back to Catherine and her team. To go on requires any action by a transit authority regarding the funding of commuter rail, heavy rail, or light rail to be approved by a majority of the MPO, and then I would have to actually go back to the legislature for a vote as well to pass the legislature. And then finally, would prohibit a transportation authority from any advocacy efforts with regard to an ordinance, legislation, or referendum. So that's a little bit of the bills that we were watching that were of importance to HART this past legislative session. Unless there's any questions, I'll move on to some discussion about FDOT. Okay.
Please continue.
So at FDOT, many of you may know, we have a new secretary of the department. Mike Dew was appointed by the governor last month. And Secretary Dew has a long background with Governor Scott's working in his office, working in another department, I believe at the Department of Corrections, and most recently was the Chief of Staff at FDOT. And many in the transportation world were very excited to see Secretary Dew's appointment. His background in transportation, his understanding of the department, of the funding, the work plan, all bodes well for many the transportation sector in this state. Following Secretary Dew's rise to Secretary, Shannon Schuessler, who is the Legislative Affairs Director at DOT, has become the Chief of Staff. And again, a great move by the department, bringing somebody who already has legislative experience at DOT into that Chief of Staff role. And so these are two individuals that we have really good working relationships with and excited to work with next session on behalf of HART. One thing that I wanted to bring up was our quick update on the continued progress at FDOT with regard to grants for HART over the last several years. This year alone, FDOT will be providing about $7.2 million in grants for HART for various projects. And over the last 4 years since we've been working with you all, it's about $45 million in total, if my numbers are correct, and I've talked to Margot about this, but about $45 million in total in various development grants for HART coming from FDOT. And so I point this out. I think this shows the respect that the folks in Tallahassee have for HART, the relationships that you all have built up there, the relationships that we've been able to help with up there. And in a time where budgets are fluctuating every year, to continue getting anywhere from $5 to $8 million a year from FDOT is something I think you all should be very, very proud of, and the staff here should be very proud of as well. Those are really a good sign of support coming from the department. And then finally, I'll just you guys are easy today, nice and quiet. I'll end it on the 18 priorities, and wanted to open this up for discussion or hear your comments or concerns. But a couple issues that I just had on my agenda for 18 as we begin committee weeks in a month. Additional planning money for HART, money for a potential new bus facility, continuing the discussion on the airporter, potential funding for the airporter. Hyperlink again, obviously we were able to get that through the legislature this past year, so should we go back after that funding again? The merger talks, continuing to watch and look out for any type of merger language coming from Tallahassee. And then finally, T-BARTA. It's been my understanding that the T-BARTA bill that was passed this year was the first year of, I think, multi-year changes to T-BARTA, and obviously that's an agency that could affect HART with the wrong change or a may instead of a shall, and so we will be keeping track of if there will be another T-BARTA bill, what that bill looks like. And so with that, I want to thank you again. I know it's not as exciting as the DC stuff. We look boring in Tallahassee with what's going on up there, but just want to thank you all again for the opportunity to continue our representation, and happy to take questions or any discussion.
Thank you, Justin. Great report. Ms. Egan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One thing which we had discussed with Justin is our previous strategy of taking a list of 5 legislative priorities as opposed to looking at some of our partners, specifically the airport and the port, that take a position paper on 1 or 2 items to the legislature. We've definitely heard feedback from this committee that if we take up a list of 5 items, it's difficult to say what are the top priorities we have as an agency, and it's difficult to really focus in on what we would like to have the legislature discuss. Our friends in Pinellas have taken the list of the 5 options, and it's the same with us. They've met about the same level of success. So one thing we would like for our committee to consider is giving us a latitude to bring you a position paper or so back at our September board meetings and take those up to Tallahassee as opposed to a boilerplate 5-priority list. From last year's priorities, we had previously included the airporter, which is our 15-minute service between the downtowns via the airport. We will be working with DOT to roll this into the TB Next framework. It definitely is an MOT, a maintenance of traffic program, and we feel that we're much more likely to see that project move forward if we are tying it to TB Next with the funding there, as opposed to making that our big request that we're trying to get from the legislature. Our friends at the airport agree, and I would hesitate for us to take forward a project that our friends at the airport had not listed as a top priority for them. Our friends in Pinellas still like the airport to the beaches service, which is not the same concept. So this allows us to be consistent on a message and focus on where we can fund this. The facility that Justin has mentioned is a priority that we can look through our DOT funding Our maintenance facility is 40 years old. Its useful life was 20 years. We have money budgeted, local and federal dollars, to renovate the facility. For essentially twice that price tag, we could completely replace the facility, be ready for new technologies, Commissioner Kemp. Much easier to go forward with EV. We'd have to build an elevator anyhow for ADA compliance, for instance. So is it more cost effective to build one from scratch, or is it cost effective to renovate that facility? And we would be working with DOT funding to identify a facility there. It would not be a regular request from the legislature. Clearly, we will be talking about autonomous vehicles in a few minutes. That is a DOT-funded priority. We will keep pushing for more in that area. Hyperlink, and then focusing on our technology improvements. This year with Mission Max, we're doing a big shift in how the rubber meets the road. And as we are stabilizing and moving forward with this new network, we have some great opportunities to continue to do things differently. Commissioner Merman's been a big advocate for Liftline and similar services. We're bringing on board a new planning manager in the next few weeks, I believe, Steve, who has extensive experience working with Lyft and Uber, and we think we can carve out some legislative support for these very visionary things here in Hillsborough County. So again, verbal dump to recap, we would be looking for DOT support for funding for a new facility, and we would be going to the legislature for technology and innovative services partnerships. With the committee's approval, we can bring back position papers, transmit them for review ahead of time, and bring this up at our September board meetings.
Very good. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, if I may.
I thought you had your hand up. Sorry.
I'm fidgety this morning. Thank you, Justin. I agree with the strategy of really looking at what are going to be our priorities, and I'm certainly most interested in the maintenance facility. I think that it's really the core of supporting all the things we want to put into place. If we can't maintain the vehicles and keep them operational and running, it's really hard to put the system in place. So I think that in being out there and touring the facility, understanding the challenges, I think that certainly is one that it's going to, I think, worth fighting a good fight for in what we do, because I do think as we continue to evolve with all the things that are happening to us, I think that's going to be a very important aspect of our success in operations over time.
Very good. Any other comments? John, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Justin, thank you for a great presentation. Appreciate that, and all the hard work you do, and especially the securing of the grant funds during your time of service. It's greatly appreciated.
Well, definitely a team effort. I mean, the staff here does a tremendous job.
Yeah,
but
absolutely, definitely a team effort. And on the note of team, it is great that we have both of our political consultants here today, because I think our governmental consultants, because there's such an interesting dynamic there between the federal and state funding, and so many questions. And so kind of talking about things at a 30,000-foot level, one of the things that I'd like to see as some of these questions are answered about AV, about funding, and I know staff does a good job of this, and I do believe we have the best team in the business, and that includes our consultants. As we go forward, I think vigilance on opportunities to be that thought leader and actually see where there might be synergy, or I guess I'd call it reinforcing confidence building, whether it be the state seeing how we use federal money, or the feds looking at how we use state money and where we're headed. And here's just one example. And again, this isn't I'm not advocating or supporting a particular business or anything to mention this, but there was a story out about, I believe Tesla is they're on the verge of, they're looking at platooning freight vehicles, autonomous freight vehicles. And when I think of a freight vehicle, a semi-truck, it's relatively similar in size to a bus. So one thought is, and I think the intent of my comment is to think, where can we be thinking as a team, kind of holistically, on what is the next, as soon as Jeff mentioned, when that spark hits, and we know what the market, what direction they're going to head in, will we be ready and positioned to jump into that spot? And so back to the freight vehicles, it's exciting to think about what's coming in transit and where we might be able to position ourselves. And I'm just going to throw this out there just as an idea. We're looking at a maintenance facility, but what if we can, have a robust partnership with the private sector where someone just provides a vehicle and we don't have to worry about a maintenance facility? They provide that as well. Because I believe Tesla's right now, they're in the process of building maintenance facilities for all of their Model 3s and Model S's. I mean, the infrastructure work just Tesla's doing alone is incredible. So I just wanted to bring that up so that as a team, we're all vigilant and our consultants are vigilant, because as these questions get answered, I just think it'll be time to talk about it. And hopefully we will have already talked about it. We're not reacting. Thank you.
Can I just comment really quick
Sure.
on that? I mean, the state, Florida, has really been a leader when it comes to a lot of this technology. And so whether it's CNG, whether it's platooning, whether it's AV, I mean, Senator Brandis has been a great champion on a lot of these issues, but we have a lot of leaders, Representative Grant. So Florida, we've seen these bills passed and legislation go into effect, and that's kind of put us at the forefront in a lot of this. And again, certainly things that we're keeping track of for HART as well and reporting back in when we see those.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. And just to follow up on that, I think we're very blessed, very fortunate to be in Florida, to be in the circumstance that we're in, and thank you. Appreciate that.
I'll just wrap up with a few final comments. If you don't ask, you don't get. So I have been very disappointed in what Hillsborough County has been getting in terms of funding out of Tallahassee. I think Pasco got about $90 million this year. Pinellas probably somewhere in that range. We did not get $90 million, just to let you all know. We have got to start thinking smarter about how we're approaching funding from Tallahassee. And I think I'd like to see our CEO sit down with the Secretary of DOT for this district and really map out a strategy of routes, intersections, whatever is needed that we can apply for and be in the work program and apply for projects in that work program. That's the key, is getting in the DOT work program. And if we don't do that, we're just going to be hanging out there defending and getting what little crumb can come across. And Justin, you're fighting hard for us. I know you are. I appreciate that. But I think on our end, we've got to start thinking a little bit harder and smarter and more strategic so we can get our fair share. We certainly have the biggest need, probably in the state, as far as transportation is concerned. And this transit agency is one of them, as Commissioner Kemp reminds us religiously about how underfunded we are. Yay! We all know that. And people are starting to wake up and realize. So I'd like you, and Jeff wants to be involved, but I think you guys all need to get together, and very quickly, too, and map out a strategy of what we're going for, because you have to work ahead. You cannot be reactive. Like if Congress does something, we're reacting and we're putting it together as quick as we can. Well, let's have the list ready to go. Okay? So that's my direction. Commissioner Kemp?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just, this is nothing I don't think we can move forward with at this time, but there are states where regular transit operations are funded because they're looked at as a significant part of the infrastructure, just like roads or sewers or anything else. State of Florida does not. State of Florida funds, as we know, specific capital projects, and I think, especially for the big urban areas in our state, that some kind of starting to look at, I'll just bring it now to start putting it out there, to look at our state legislature funding operations as they do in many of the states with urban areas, and they recognize that as being part of the need. And an important part, and also as we also look at the way funding is going to change for transportation in the future. I think it's important for the urban areas that are depending on transit systems to start that conversation. So I'll just put that out there.
Thank you. Appreciate the comment. Thank you, Justin.
Right.
Go
Thank
get 'em.
you.
Thank you. Okay, our next presentation is the proposed 2018 to 2027 Transit Development Plan. For those, the acronym is TDP. And I guess Joel Ray from Tyndale Oliver is going to present. Thank you.
Madam Chair, by brief introduction, we have been seeing Joel throughout this year. Tyndale Oliver is, of course, a consultant who came up with our comprehensive operations analysis as transformation to service, which we have branded as Mission Max. Today we'll see the TDP, which shows what does this do for us in a 10-year time frame. We're excited about where we can get in the near term, but also the long term. A shift you will see next year is staff continuing to work with Tyndale to come back with a 15-year TDP. Now, why this is different, historically in Tampa Bay, your transit agencies have done planning for transit 1 year at a time. None of us have adopted a strategic plan or a 3 to 5 year project plan list. It's difficult to do that if you refresh every year. So next year we will embark on stretching this out to 15 years. So we are always in compliance with DOT, but instead of focusing our effort on a year, we can look at what we accomplished 3 to 5 years. We take control of the transit planning, and then we're able to more successfully integrate the DOT requests that Commissioner Merman was just discussing. We are in a very weak position when we go to Tallahassee and DC with a 1 or 2 year plan, and it is time to change that, and this is the foundation of that process. So Joe will take it away.
Very good, Catherine. Thank you for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see everyone. I'm going to take us quickly through that second part of our process. As you know, when we started this, HART staff was working hard to enhance their services, change some of the services, the way they were doing business, become more efficient with the introduction of the hyperlink, looking at the autonomous vehicle pilot, things of that nature. And staff was working hard to try and reconceptualize how they were going to do business given the funding constraints that were a reality for them. And so they embarked on this study, which was a combination operational analysis and transit development plan. That first portion, as Catherine mentioned, Mission Max, resulted in a reimagined system that would begin October 1st, 2018. But there needs to be more to the story, and that's where the TDP comes in, is where do we go from here? Because that's just the start. You remember this slide, hopefully, from a previous presentation where I was kind of previewing the study and what the TDP was. As you recall, the operational analysis, it's really the technical review of the routes of the network to find out what we can do to change it, make it more effective, make it more efficient, maybe save some resources, and reallocate some resources. We've done that with Mission Max. Now we're moving forward to the TDP, which is more of the 10-year vision. What do we want to be in the next decade, and how are we going to get there? And this lays that groundwork. So I'm going to take you through the TDP itself. And as I've mentioned previously, there are a couple parts to the TDP. There's a lot of the analysis that goes into it, and I'll take you through a few slides to tell you about the situation appraisal, the community engagement that was completed, and what priorities were set to guide the recommendations. But then there's the networks. 2018 network resulting from Mission Max. I won't go too heavily into that. You all have had probably your fill of Mission Max the last couple of weeks. 2027 is really where I want to focus, and that is taking you through two versions of this vision, and that is what if we had all of the money, no cost constraints, and what are our needs? What do we need to do to enhance our system to meet all the things that we heard from the public and that we'd like to do? And then there's the version of, okay, now we've got to apply fiscal reality. Where do we go from a funded standpoint? So I'll show you both of those. We'll wrap up with some comparisons to show how the networks impact the populations and various segments of the population, and then probably the part that you really don't care much about, and that's what it could cost, right? That's not important. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about revenues. So let's jump in and just quickly, much like the operational analysis, we needed to be out in the field looking at routes and understanding what was going on with them. The same thing happens in a TDP. We need to go out and find out what's occurring in the community. So there's a lot of demographic analysis. looking at accessibility. We look at HART, the current service, how it's functioning, how it's been functioning over the last 5 years in terms of a trend analysis, how it compares to peer systems from around the state and the country, looking at land use. It's almost like a massive SWOT analysis where we look at the strengths of the system and of the environment. We look at barriers that are maybe hurting HART a little bit and enabling it not to do its business the way it should be. And then we come up with opportunities for improvement, and that starts building this program for the TDP. So we take that analysis and we couple it with what we hear from the public. And if you recall, when we last left you and we were kind of finalizing the Mission Max, we were going to go back out end of June, beginning of July, do a lot more grassroots outreach, more public workshops. We have completed those. You see here all of the different events that were held throughout both processes, the COA and the TDP. And just to give you a sense of how many folks we touched, you see there in the green, this engagement type, these are all of the different things where we do more information interchange or exchange, where we talk to folks, we educate, we provide information, but we're also getting input from them. And you see there over 1,500 different folks reached in this information interchange or exchange type workshop or engagement. Online, another 20,000 folks where we've provided information. This is more information dissemination, giving them a chance to react to online surveys or things of that nature. So over 22,000 participants. But keep in mind that we also used information from the last onboard survey from 2014, which had over 5,000 respondents, HART riders. And we also used a survey that was completed by USF, by Qatar, where they interviewed over 3,316 staff and faculty and students, grad and undergrad, to find out what their transportation needs are and how they use HART. So in effect, we really had over 30,000 contacts, whether we got information back or just provided education. So pretty expanded engagement process, and that helped us set priorities, and we've talked about those. Primarily that it's time to look at not just the equitable coverage all over the county, but focus more on frequency in the core. Let's enhance where our greatest ridership potential is. Let's be more financially feasible, especially in the near term, while we deal with funding revenue streams. And then we also had some ridership forecast included in there, trying to better connect the region along with our relationship with the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan study that's ongoing. And you see here that in the community, the priorities were primarily the high-frequency service and fast connections between hubs. So that's what we were going to focus on in our improvements. And if you remember that one graphic I showed you, we had that continuum between frequency and coverage, and 79% of the people said they valued frequency. Only 11% said the coverage was important to them. 9% were undecided. They were in that neutral area. So again, that set our priorities for the recommendations that you'll see in the upcoming networks. So 2018, our guiding principles, improving travel times, trying to enhance frequency in that core area, trying to get out of the direction travel taken care of so that we're more direct, better purpose for our routes, and so that we can get people more quickly to where it is they want to go to. So that's the 2018 network, what's been branded as Mission Max. Some of the highlights, you see the Route 1 on Florida Avenue and Metro Rapid revamped to get 12 to 15-minute service on those corridors, 20-minute frequency on the 3 key routes, the Route 6 on 56th Street, Route 12 on 22nd and 34 on Hillsborough, improving frequency on 13 additional routes shown there in that third bullet, more direct service on 10 other routes where we've realigned those to give them better purpose. And then, of course, conversion of the flex services over to Hyperlink and adding more Hyperlink service. That's Mission Max. That's what's already been approved. And this becomes, in effect, our first year of the 10-year plan for the TDP.
And Joe, I'm going to jump in here.
Absolutely.
A point to consider is the board did approve a 2018 overhaul that included Brandon Flex at this point, and we are going to continue to work in Brandon to make sure that the services out there meet the needs which are there. So don't want that to be misconstrued that the Brandon Flex is going away.
No, and it's not. Everything that we have in our first year plan has been modified based on the results of Monday's meeting and what was approved. So we've made the changes over the week and tried to get this in the presentation pretty quickly so that you are seeing the results of that.
I think this is a proper time for me to make this statement because I was pretty disappointed with what's been proposed for South County. much like Commissioner White, though I realize the plan does need to go forward, and that's why I did support it going forward. I'm just going to make this statement. You all need South and East County to support any kind of referendum coming down the pike. And if you don't get more service down there and get people used to riding on transit and buses and whatever is proposed to them, they're not going to see what's in it for them. And I can't say it any more bluntly than that. They will not support future transit plans for this county if we don't start giving them options for transit. And I was very disappointed in TDP and what they offered South County. 60-minute service, that doesn't help anybody too much. So just put that under your thinking cap, and I know we're going to move forward, but we've got to do something fairly quickly to get service down there.
Okay, well, we'll touch on South County because there are some improvements in the TDP that will reflect actually improved service on Route 31 that operates on 41 to 30 minutes, and then there's going to be the introduction of the service on 301 as well as some additional flex service down there. So that's all reflected in both the needs plan as well as the funded. So let's talk first about the needs plan. And again, this is the financially unconstrained plan. This is if we could do whatever we needed to do without concern for the financial aspects. You'll see again the core network, greater frequency. Outside of the core, what we're trying to do in those outskirts where routes have been pulled in is using more of the hyperlink and the flex type services, TNCs, to provide access to the endpoints of the routes and bringing people into the core. Enhanced connectivity between some of our major uses like USF downtown and the airport, regional connectivity, and then, of course, the AV pilot, continuation of that, introduction of waterborne transportation, and ensuring that we have a grid that is covering the core area and quickly connects people all within the area of the coverage of that network. So this is what it looks like, and should be a familiar graphic. It's just been modified based on the first year of the Mission Max. But you see there in the red shown there on the map, the 15-minute corridors. Those cover that core area and provide that grid connectivity, supported by some of the 20-minute service like the Airporter and some of the Peak Hour Express, 30-minute service in that secondary network and the USF downtown to airport connection. And then in the lower density areas, using the 60-minute service to start growing the demand for ridership so that ultimately, as we evolve the TDP in coming years, that service can then be enhanced to more frequency or other types of services. We have the feeders, hyperlink, the ride hailing, of course, the waterborne, and the AV. So this is the core network, and what the services on the outskirts are intended to do in this case, because there is regional connectivity addressed in the needs plan, you have services that connect starting on the left and working around clockwise, connecting to St. Petersburg, Oldsmar, West Pasco, Wesley Chapel, out to Lakeland, and then South County as well. And then the capital version, that's the operations side. And the capital version, new buses to support both replacement of existing vehicles and purchases of new vehicles to address any new services that are provided. We've talked about the maintenance facility. One of the things that the maintenance facility study did was look at the possibility of a satellite facility, not just potential improvements to the existing facility, but creating a satellite so that you can decrease the amount of deadhead. In the system, you have a large coverage area, and having a single point for all the buses, especially one that's constrained in space, and as you grow the system, may need additional parking of buses unless you go to vertical structures. Looking at a potential satellite maintenance facility is something that we've considered. We've looked at scenario 3 from that study, which is a $75 million facility that would act in concert with the current one on 21st. We also have the infrastructure to support autonomous vehicle beyond just the pilot. Bus stop infrastructure and ADA accessibility, about $500,000 a year to support continuing ADA compliance on bus stops and enhancing the infrastructure at stops. And then, of course, dealing with ITS and bus technology. So those are all included in the needs plan as well. Now let's shift gears and start bringing in the fiscal reality. Okay, now we've got to fund the plan. So much like we do with an LRTP, where you have a cost feasible and you have the needs plan, we have the same thing. The funded plan is basically that which we can accommodate with existing revenue streams and revenue that is likely to be achieved. We talked a little bit earlier in some of the legislative discussion about FDOT funding, service development, urban corridor funds, things of that nature can be tapped for some of the services that are proposed in the funded plan. Here, we still have the 15-minute core area, little fewer routes, 10, 5 in the north-south direction, 5 in the east-west, as opposed to 16 in the needs plan. All routes go to 7 days a week service. All the flex is replaced by hyperlink. You still see the new flex areas. In fact, there's 10 new hyperlink areas proposed to go along with the 4 existing ones, as shown on that map. There's also some new routes. This is where I mentioned the South County route on 301 that will also provide connectivity along 674 to Brandon, and then new flex or a flex service that's converted to fixed route up in the Northdale-Carrollwood area. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, the Route 31 that operates on 41 down to South County would go to 30 minutes. So these are all enhancements that are included in the funded plan.
That's a plan that's 10 years away.
No, this is a 10-year plan. This
Right.
is not. I'm just showing you what it looks like in year 10 of the plan. So there.
I'm being facetious. I
Sure.
apologize. 2027 makes it look like that's when it's going to happen.
No.
But
Right.
I understand that. I just, when they need it now, it's hard to have, far away projections.
Sure, I understand that. And the plan is, again, I'm just giving you the overview. In the actual documentation, you'll see that everything is phased in. And a lot of that is due, you don't want to start everything in 2027, obviously, because of need, but also just to gear that up and buy all the vehicles would be a significant endeavor. So you want to try and spread that out over time. So what we show here in this image is the core area once again, showing you a little difference between what was in the needs plan, and instead of having that regional connectivity, we would actually have the flex or the hyperlink services feeding into that core network and providing that connectivity from the outskirts. And now, of course, we have capital included. You'll see there that the number of buses much fewer because not as many new services, but we still do accommodate replacement buses. Phase 2 of that maintenance facility would be the PD&E associated with it, so getting prepared for when capital dollars are available to construct. You would have phase 1's been done, that's the maintenance facility study. Then you would do PD&E to do the design and the engineering behind it and environmental. And then phase 3 would actually be construction. Phase 3 is included in the needs, but not in the funded. That's something we'd have to look for money for. And then bus stop infrastructure and ADA accessibility continues to be accommodated throughout the 10 years of the capital plan. So now that I've talked about what the plans include, you may ask yourself, well, what is this doing for our riders? What is it doing for the general public? How are we impacting them? Because Mission Max did kind of bring in the network somewhat, and now we're starting to grow it again. How are we going to accommodate people? Well, just to show you these graphics, the first few graphics I'm going to show you is based on walk access, quarter-mile access to the network itself. So you can see here the population in Hillsborough County that in 2018 with that network, the Mission Max network, those folks that would be within walking distance of the network is about 395,000, give or take. So when we apply the funded plan through 2027, at that time, by 2027, when everything's in place, you would actually have almost 475,000 folks in the service area within a quarter mile of bus service. When you look at the needs plan, you could see that it goes up incrementally. You've got about 506,000. So our funded plan, the coverage area is very similar to the needs. You're not going up that much. Same thing occurs with employment. You see there in the funded, about 393,000 folks, employees would be within a quarter mile walk distance of the bus service. What about some of our folks who are maybe impacted more greatly by changes to transit service, low income, minority? You can see here, this is the total population shown by the blue bars. The same graphic that I had showed you before. The yellow bars on the left actually reflect The minority population, you can see that between 2018 and 2027 funded plan, we have about 30 extra thousand folks that are going to be within a quarter-mile walk distance, and then another 10,000 or so, give or take, in the 2027 if we're able to accommodate the needs plan wholly. Same thing happens with low-income population. You see that we do increase access for those folks as well to the network. Now let's talk about the frequency of the core network, 15 minutes. So how many folks are going to be within a quarter-mile access, walk access of the frequent service, 15-minute or better? You can see here in 2018, about 56,000 folks. The funded plan, that jumps to about 179, and then 224 in the needs plan. That's just in terms of population. Employment shows significant increases as well for the funded and the needs plan. We looked again at the minority and low-income populations. You could see increases there. So from 2018 to the funded plan, a significant increase in access to the frequent service. So this is what we want to see. We want to see more people having access to the core, and then the same thing occurs with the low-income population. And then we looked at some other populations. We looked at the older American population, 65 years and older. And you can see there that their access to 15-minute service is going to go up in both the funded and the needs plans. Zero-vehicle households, again, they're going to go up in terms of access. And then finally, the limited English proficiency populations, which would correlate pretty closely with minority populations. So, in effect, with either the funded or even better, the needs plan, we're going to see an increase in access to not just the network as a whole, but also our core frequent network. So these are all positive impacts of these changes. So now I'm going to wrap up with, well, what is this going to cost? Obviously, the costs for the needs plan shown on the left graphic are much higher. These numbers have gone up a little bit. When I gave you a preview last time, we were still working with staff trying to nail down the capital side of it. Operations, because of the evolution of Mission Max over the last few weeks, also changed. We're now at a total 10-year cost of about $150 million a year, $1.5 billion, with operating being about 1.3 of that, capital being the other $200 million. So that's the needs plan. What we can actually fund through 2027 is shown on the right, with a capital expenditure of about $73 million and $820 million being the operating cost, 10-year cost being $893 million. To put that in the context of where we are today, at just an operating cost of $1.3 billion or $130 million a year on average, that's double what HART's budget is. So the needs plan would actually double what we're putting out there in terms of service. May not necessarily double coverage, but it's doubling service because of all the frequency impacts. In terms of the funded plan, at $82 million a year, that's about a 25% increase over HART's current operating budget. So still a significant increase, but not quite as high as it would be if we were able to fund everything in the needs plan. These are the annual costs, just to show you how they escalate over time. This is for the funded plan, so that's the $893 million number you see there. The large bars in 2021, or the blue bars in 2021 and 2022, this is where a lot of those replacement vehicles are going to be necessary because of the life cycle of existing buses, plus some new bus purchases, and then the accommodation of that PD&E study for that satellite facility. Now, I will close it by talking about revenues. This is the distribution of where the revenues are expected to come from over the 10-year period for the funded plan. Majority, almost half, coming from ad valorem. Federal operating and state operating grants making up about a quarter of that budget. Local operating grants, new FDOT, that's service development and corridor funds. Obviously, fares from new services and existing services would cover another quarter, and then other revenues such as advertising, interest income, other sources of that nature. And then finally, I will mention about ad valorem. I know we've talked in the past. Karen had even mentioned she had done some research on the homestead exemption changes that may be coming down the pike. We have assumed a what we believe is a conservative revenue growth, 2% per year in ad valorem. This does not account for what occurs with the homestead exemption. It's not occurred, so we can't judge what's going to happen. But that's something that could change as you do your modifications to the TDP each year, as Catherine was saying at the beginning. That's something that could possibly change and impact your funded plan because of that revenue source. But if Karen was correct and property values continue to grow again, they may exceed what projections are regardless of what is done with homestead exemption. So that's why we just stayed conservative and expect that this will probably hold true regardless of what happens in that case. With that, our next steps is presenting or going back to the board in September on the September 11th meeting and having the TDP adopted at that time. It will be submitted to DOT. Immediately thereafter is a final adopted plan. We're going to submit prior to that date, by the September 1st date, the draft plan for their review to begin. And then we'll give them 12 days later or 11 days later the final adopted plan. And then working with HART staff to address any comments that we get back from DOT, and then working on implementation of the recommendations in that plan. With that, that's my presentation. I thank you for allowing me to be in front of you again today. I will open it up for any additional questions.
That was excellent. Thank you very, very much. Commissioner Kemp?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a huge plan to
Digest.
even,
Yeah,
I'm just
it's gonna
sitting
take a while to
here.
digest.
I'm like, look,
Yeah, that's why you have until the 11th.
yeah. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Hey, that's what I'm here for.
And there's obviously a lot of areas to focus on or to think about, and to begin to look at more closely. And I understand why it's not done, but one thing I would really like to see and wonder if it could be incorporated in here more would be the ferry service in terms of how. I understand why you're not doing it, but in terms of its projection, I know when you did that breakout at the beginning, you had kind of a preference for, or that you had asked people what if they preferred ferry service, but then you had regular service or whatever to major areas. I don't even see why we would break out ferry. I mean, it could just be included in the category and think of it just like you do a bus or commuter rail or anything else like that. And to me, it just really affects the service we can give to South County. As to my concern about, we're talking about our services there or the future and how South County looks at that. And when we have a vote, initially, it would just serve the initial proposal that the county has is to serve McDill only, but I think it would very quickly evolve from that. But even if we were just serving that, many of our buses and some of the issues we've heard are from South County and the numerous buses we have serving McDill from South and East County. So I'm just wondering about the calculations and bringing that in because it's such a low cost, easy option, and I'd really like to see how that plays out in it because I just feel like this would, at such low cost, would open up our options so greatly in terms of also our traditional bus service and everything else we can give in South and East County. So I'd kind of like to see if that could possibly play be in here as a planned possibility or as a planned entity.
It is included in, I'm not certain if it's year 342. It was based on the schedule which exists right now for ferry implementation on the track that the county is pursuing, but it is included that when the ferry goes live, that the service in South County is modified, turns into circulator service to and from. At this point, we're using Schultz as a location. What we can do for the final document is call out the ferry in a stronger subsection, so it's not mixed in. It gets its own sort of billing, and we can stress the importance there. Again, we do have it folded in. There are some challenges since we won't be operating it. We'll find a way to make sure that it's highlighted for the
it's in the premium transit plan. Mm-hmm. So I think that you probably should really take a hard look at that.
And the interplay is so great with our entire transit system. It would be as if we would
Yeah.
put in a commuter rail or a BRT or something and not have it be part of
And let me be clear, it is included. In this overview, we're not showing it as well as we could.
Right.
But it is included in here.
Yeah, you need to, especially, again, I'm thinking of support in South County for transit moving forward. This is really critical.
And just point of clarification, let me just say the ferry service is included in the needs plan beginning in 2023. Obviously, there's some capital before that because you've got portages that have to be developed, acquisition of the vehicles. That's one of the main reasons why you don't treat it as a regular route, because FTA doesn't treat it as a local bus service. It's different, and you have a lot more capital infrastructure that has to be developed. But it's not included in the funded. So, Commissioner, I just want to be clear. Are you saying that you'd like to see how it can fit into the funded plan? That's what I thought I heard you saying.
Because
That's what
we
I want to make sure.
already kind of have it funded.
Right, we
now. So that's why I just want the route in there.
Exactly.
I think she and I want the routes.
Gotcha.
Put it in the needs.
It's in the needs. It's there.
Okay, but it's not showing right now. So if you can incorporate it, I think that would be better.
And I think we could we could use our transit or traditional bus service so much more efficiently and serve so many more people when we have that. So that's where I'm going with it. I also we do have it funded, and that's the beauty of it too. As an option, I just think it's so important to be considering that when we're looking at South and East County, that to not have it somehow spoken for in there, integrated, or even if it were again, I understand kind of why you didn't, but then I really think it's critical to have it be part of that.
Yeah.
And Commissioner, you speak exactly to the problem with us doing this 1 year, 2 year at a time. We lack a vehicle to show that. This is one of the driving reasons that we need a 3 to 5 year strategic plan. So we have something which shows our commitment to connecting with the ferry, and it's not just trust me, it's baked in there. And we lack that now. We'll be introducing that next year.
There's also just one statistic that you gave that it went by so fast. I don't think it was in here in the slideshow, but way back at the beginning, you might know it off the top of your head, but the frequency, didn't you said something like 73% or something?
Oh, yes. That was when I went back to the priorities. I had mentioned, if you recall, there was a chart that we used at the public outreach events that was a continuum, double arrowhead, and we told them on the one side, we said, would you prefer, and I'll actually read it because I've got a copy, I want a bus service that comes every 10 to 20 minutes, even if it means I have to walk more, or ride hail or drive to a park and ride. And then the other end of the spectrum, and that was frequency holds sway for me. I don't care about coverage or equity or anything. I want to get to where I need to go quickly. The other end of the spectrum is kind of the coverage or the equity side, and that is I want bus coverage area to stay as it is or even expand, even if it means that the bus is going to run every 30 to 60 minutes. It's going to be less frequent because we just don't have the resources for that core area. So we put that continuum out, explained it to the folks, and what we heard or saw as people placed dots, 79% of the folks who answered that question said they preferred A, which was frequency. Only 11% indicated that they agreed with the B statement, which was the coverage, and 9% said they were neutral. That's the statistics that I had quoted, and I apologize, I'm trying to get back to that slide. But
thank you. I just, that is what they find, and what they find in practice all over the country, as well as in preference,
Absolutely.
but also in practice when you do that. And I know that this is kind of what, or not kind of, it's really what you have. We've directed our plan to do, and it's really important for us to do that. We've lost 6% of our ridership, and again, we have how many riders a day?
Over 45,000.
I think it's important for us every meeting, maybe at the beginning of the meeting, somehow in the executive director's report, to state how many riders we have a day for people to know, because when I go out in public and say that, people are shocked. I mean, I think they think 3,000 people ride our buses a day or something like that. We should note that we already have 45,000 people a day in Hillsborough County riding or using our bus service, or riders a day using HART. And I think that's important for us to put out there. But I also think that this push towards looking at more efficiently using our services, I happen to think all over the country, many of the services are dropping off. The people that are using the Uber and Lyft type services for short trips I think that is probably a huge portion of it that's not accounted for anywhere. But for systems that did improve and took this tact, the few systems that have been doing this with lower resources, or sometimes, everybody has better resources than us. That's just uncontestable. But they have seen they haven't experienced a transit drop, but they've also experienced transit user increases in Portland and Houston and Seattle, where they've looked to deploy more frequency and kind of more efficiencies in what they did. So I think this is an important step for us, no matter what. Also, I just would like to say thank you. I'm glad to see the map in there with the colors that delineate the frequency. I think that really gives us a really clear picture of our bus system in just a simple graphic like that. So thank you for doing that. And there's a whole lot more, but I think this is moving in the right direction. I think the right direction is to go out there and hear what people want and what people are looking for and what people's needs are and what their disappointments are in this, and keep trying to work towards efficiency, frequency, and it's a huge thing to take in. And again, I'll say religiously how woefully, incredibly, shamefully underfunded we are, even compared to Pinellas. Hugely underfunded, the most underfunded transit system in the nation for any metropolitan area our size by a long shot. And we need to be looking at every way, I think, that we can bring more resources to our to bring a plan like this, and to start to I have a goal of seeing us at least start to approach a mediocre transit service, and that would require us having substantially more resources, and that isn't a reflection on what we're doing or how we're using our resources. It's a reflection on the lack of resources that we have invested in HART, and I'm sorry to say that way, but that's the reality of it until we start getting more resources to support this transit agency.
One of the things we heard from the public, I just mentioned, because Catherine and her staff have done a wonderful job.
Yeah, you're going to have to make it very short, because I'm leaving in 15 minutes, and we're going to lose a quorum, and we have 5 items to approve.
I was going to say that we hear regularly that people who ride believe that HART's doing an incredible job with the resources they have. To speaking to Commissioner Kemp's point, if there are more resources, I believe you've got the right people in place to do more with it. We just need more resources.
Thank you. Great report. Thank you so much. Do you need any action on this? Okay, so that is action item 3A. So we have already discussed this. Do I have a motion? This is the presentation that he just gave. Yes. Do I have a motion to approve item 3A? Okay, motion by Commissioner Kemp. Do I have a second? Second by Director Bowers. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Like sign opposed. Thank you all very much. Let's get more service to South County. She talks about underfunded. I talk about South County. And one day we're going to be able to say South County and we're not underfunded anymore. Okay, then item 3B. Ms. Egan, who
yes, ma'am.
In
the interest
Thank
of
you
time,
all for
Mr.
coming.
Sandusky is available for additional questions. This is seeking approval to exercise the final year of our contract with the advocacy group for our state lobbying services.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve Item 3B, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Like sign opposed, show that passed. Okay, item 3C. This is a big report because I went over it last night.
We will make it, we will simplify for you. Item 3C is asking the committee approval to take to the board meeting the revised mission, vision, and outcomes. The success plan is backing up information that we will continue to provide to the board. But the action item itself is a revised mission, vision, and outcomes. We brought these in draft form to the board in March, and Mark Ash discussed these at last week's board meeting, so all of you would have heard that intense briefing. By board policy, changes to the mission and the vision statement must go through the public hearing process. So by bringing it to committee today, it will go through the public hearing process at our budget hearings in the month of September. The document shows them on page 3-7. We also have them on the wall behind you. This is part of communicating to our community and our stakeholders, and also Tallahassee and DC, we are doing business differently. A very active mission, taking people to the places that enhance their lives. That is our bread and butter. Vision, getting beyond equitable just in the service area. A vision saying that we invite, inspire, and implement sustainable and innovative transportation. We highlight invite because we are moving into a mode of more P3s. You will hear from our AV presentation that we are looking at a vendor who will own the vehicle. So just as Jeff Booth had discussed, we're not taking on these technology implications. So that is our vision. And then finally, replacing the KPIs with 5 higher level outcomes. The board packet does include a chart showing how the traditional KPIs dovetail back with the outcomes which we have proposed.
Okay, we have had always a robust discussion on KPIs, so always glad to see those changes. Thank you very much. Is there any discussion on this?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve item 3C. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Like sign opposed, show that pass.
Madam Chairman, 3D is really a follow-up on 3C. It is simply the approval of the policy that correlates with the mission and vision. It's the 4th page from the end of your packet. It looks amazingly similar to the one I'm showing you. And essentially, you can see what it says. The new mission statement will be HART takes people to places that enhance their lives. The new vision statement will be HART invites, inspires, and implements sustainable and innovative transportation. You've had discussions and presentations on this before.
Okay. We have motion
Second.
and a second to approve item 3D, which is the policies that implement item 3C. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Like sign, show it passed. Okay, item 3E.
And to keep quorum again, we will be brief. This is a very exciting item. This is the recommendation to the board to move forward with a vendor for our autonomous vehicle program on Marion Transit Way. At this schedule, we will potentially be the first transit agency in the country with consistent AV service. We have seen pilots at our friends and other agencies. We will be the first agency in the country with this consistently operating. This allows us again to be a thought leader, shaping the technology, shaping the policy, shaping how transit interfaces, and gives us the ability to have our fingers in what is going on with transit as critically the regional transit plan continues, and we have a much better source of information for how autonomy can improve that project. I'll turn it over to Mr. Burns and Mr. Haney.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Al Burns, Director of Procurement and Contracts Administration. Earlier this year, we released an RFI in regard to autonomous vehicles. We got a tremendous response, and I just would like to go over the procurement considerations and then hand it over to the project manager. On May 1st, 2017, we released the RFP in accordance with our policies and procedures. We received a total of 4 robust responses to the solicitation. The evaluation criteria that was used was the firm's experience, support and program management, connected vehicle applications, work plan, and price, and lastly, innovative pricing. We want to see what other vehicle manufacturers and corporations could bring to the table in support of that project. We also additionally, the evaluation criteria consisted of members from Tampa, the City of Tampa, VIG, members of District 7, FDOT District 7, Katina, who's in the audience, and on behalf of the CEO and CFO, I really want to thank you for your participation in this. Lastly, Stantec is a locally owned company, has a local office here in Tampa, and they will be the prime on the project. To go over the project, I bring before you Shannon Haney, the ITS coordinator.
Good morning, everyone. We're very excited about this project. Shannon Haney, ITS coordinator, and just to give you a brief background, consideration of time, this project early in 2016, the City of Tampa, they submitted an application for the Smart City, USDOT Smart Cities application initiative. And so with that being said, they had over 40 letters of support with the private as well as public institutions. And it's a great privilege to be able to be a part of this as HART is concerned, because this project is going to be a one-of-a-kind opportunity to be able to demonstrate this technology in conjunction with the THEA project, which is the Connected Vehicle Project. So it's going to be very interesting to see how these two technologies coexist and demonstrate that, not only here locally, but it'll be a demonstration that others across the country should be able to look at and take lessons from. So I wanted to also mention to Stantec, they had a few words that they wanted to talk about, and I'd like to invite Mr. Karosha. He's the ITS chair of the U.S. Technical Advisory Group for ITS, and he's also the head of the U.S. Delegation of International Standards of Organization Technical Committee for ITS. So I'd like to have Stantec, on behalf of Stantec, Mr. Karosh, say a few words.
And Kirosh Uliai has been a leader in the industry around the country. He's globally recognized, and I've had the pleasure of working with him before, so I'm very happy to be working with him again.
Thank you, Ms. Egan. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and the members of the HART staff. I'm Kurosh Oliai, Senior Principal for Stantec Consulting Services. And we are a community of 22,000 transportation professionals working out of 400 offices from 6 continents. We have here today with me the father of autonomous vehicles, Pierre Lafort. Pierre, will you please stand? Who is the trainer and innovator of all these autonomous vehicles you see out there in the market today. We're partners with Coast Autonomous, that he is the chief technology thereof. Also have Frank Domingo, a 30-year veteran of the transport industry, another locally based individual, as is Pierre, who lives in the region. And he is not an unknown person to the transit industry. We are locally based. Our vehicles are manufactured in the United States. We are committed to bring down the overage on our budget of about $126,800 across the life of the project, down to zero. We are also committed to seek additional outside sources of funding, which we can bring to the table once a notice to proceed is issued, to better enhance and extend the life of the project. Also, we are committing to you to coordinate with the CV pilots and assist you with your next successful Smart Cities initiative that is ongoing. Thank you very much. Looking forward to working with you.
Well, thank you very much for coming, and we're honored to have you here with us today. And I think we need to move forward and approve the project so we can say congratulations at the same time. Do we have a question, Commissioner Kemp?
Yes. I would actually like to understand a little bit more about what transportation services you have in operation now.
No, we have a question we need to answer. Yeah, go ahead.
As far as transportation services are concerned, we are the only consulting firm in the country who are operating connected vehicle, autonomous vehicle test beds. We are the program manager for Momentum Station in Contra Costa, California. We are also, due to international interoperability that your first speaker, Holland and Knight, was talking about, that is most important, USDOT. We are also doing interoperability by having test beds in in Edmonton, Canada, because we don't want to be faced with the tolling industry debacle that is faced here in the society today. We want the same vehicles that are operational in the U.S. to be operational regionally, nationally, and continentally. Furthermore, last week, internationally speaking, we received a contract from the government Ministry of Transport in New Zealand to do the same for them across the oceans. As far as transportation services are concerned, we are in highway planning, transit planning. As Ms. Egan indicated, I'm a 25-year veteran of transit industry myself. My proposed project manager, Frank, used to run another transit property for about over 3 years, period, here in Florida. And whatever services that you may possibly think across the spectrum of not only transportation, but the entire spectrum of transportation, we do work in and operate from. As I said, we are a community of 22,000 out of 400 offices.
Okay. Do you have a follow-up, Commissioner Kemp?
So right now, too, in terms of autonomous, can you give me some sense of what you're doing with that?
We are extremely, at least Stantec is extremely close and closely involved with all the policies that you heard this morning earlier. As chair of the United States Technical Advisory Group for all this ITS stuff, I'm personally involved in it, and my team is involved in it, and complement the question, the answer I gave to your initial question, that what transportation services are being involved in. If you're talking about driving buses, maintaining buses, if that's what you're referring to, no, we do not do that, because these are autonomous or driverless vehicles. Driverless vehicles do not need traditional operation. They need a typical operation by technicians. So we are engineers and scientists and technicians.
Thank you.
And I assume there are going to be deliverables that you'll be monitoring from the project. Is that correct?
Absolutely, Madam
Okay.
Chair. And to piggyback on the initial question, that was part of the evaluation. There were several actual transit providers, your traditional First Transit, et cetera, that submitted proposals. But because of the technology, we thought it was best.
Yeah.
The evaluation team thought it moved in Stantec's direction.
Okay. Thank you. We have a motion to
So moved.
do something. We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
And we have a second. Is there any further discussion?
Just a clarification. This is the first step in the authorization. The next step will obviously be at the full board.
Oh, yes.
Okay, just
Yes,
wanted to
everything we
clarify that.
approve here goes to the full board. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to move it to the full board. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Like sign opposed?
No. Opposed.
Okay, thank you. Show it passed. And I know these next two items on new business are items that I brought up. But
We will transmit them to you in writing, the updates in writing.
but you'll bring them up at the board meeting?
Yes, ma'am. With these, yes,
Do a
ma'am.
report at the
Yes.
board meeting. Pardon me? What happened?
We have two members in the audience who wanted to participate in the discussion.
Oh, on Sunshine Line? Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, we will, Ruthie Reyes-Burkhardt, do you have an update for us?
We don't have any more voting, so if you have to go.
Okay.
I know this meeting has lasted longer, mostly because of the federal and state updates, but those are very important, so, because it regards funding.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Board. Yes, our staff and I are going to be meeting with Sunshine Line. We have a meeting scheduled with the Director of Sunshine Line, Scott Clark, for Wednesday. Our service development staff is working alongside them to look at what opportunities that we can collaborate on in order to provide a transportation solution for members of our community that are in the south part of the county, Sun City, that we're looking for an opportunity to get to the Brandon Mall and also to St. Joseph South. That discussion is being held Wednesday and looking at Sunshine Line as a potential provider of some of the routing or some shuttles up in that direction.
Okay, so I guess what I want to make sure is every single concern that came up to us, especially going to the Division of Blind Services on Platt Street, and there were other, that all those are being answered and met.
That is correct, ma'am. We have met, actually discussed with Division of Blind Services and Lighthouse for the Blind host our
Lighthouse for the Blind, I'm sorry, that's what I meant.
Yes. Lighthouse for the Blind on Platt, and the routing that was approved at the board meeting does still meet the same need that they were requesting, and so we still will be serving the same 2 stops that they brought forward to your attention.
Okay, so could I see, like, when you bring it to the full board, what I'd like to see is an exact, maybe, listing of the issues that came up regarding disabled having access and to a route that was being changed, or to the Lighthouse for the Blind. If we could just list those, and then I'm going to try and be in your meeting, though we have a Board of County Commission meeting that day, and I don't know how long that will take us. So, but I'd like to just see at our board meeting that list with the answers to what the problems were.
Yes, ma'am.
When is our
That'd
next
be great.
ADA board meeting?
Our ADA Accessibility Committee meeting does meet this Thursday at 3 in this office.
And we'll
Okay.
take this information to them.
Okay, and I should be there for that too.
Yes, ma'am.
So, okay, well, that's great.
Thank you.
Okay, we need to make sure these questions and concerns are being met. I'm very concerned about it. And if Sunshine Line can help, they're there. Okay, great. McDill.
Update on McDill. We are currently scheduling a meeting with Fred Fallman, who is our main liaison. He was our liaison when he was active duty. Now that he's retired, he's still at the base. So I spoke with him early this morning, and we're still working on getting that final meeting coordinated. We will be at that meeting going through our schedules, backup plans, load information. We'll bring an update to you. One point that we do hear a lot in talking to our friends in McDill, there's a statement that the DoD subsidizes the routes. Our friends from McDill participate in the federal Trans-Bins program, so their passes are purchased for them under a federal assistance program that's open to all federal employees. USF researchers participating in federal programs get the same thing. However, we have heard this previously, so we are working with our veterans on staff, specifically Lucian Campillo in project management and Philip St. Pierre in scheduling, to make sure we can start pulling together some FAQs and address some of our information a little more proactively, so we have a closer relationship. Once we have that meeting scheduled, I believe we have reached out to the commissioner's offices. We'll go back with that and get you a written update on our McDill service. We will not leave anyone stranded, whether it is a patron who is currently using us with disabilities or one of our patrons who's going to the base. We will make sure everyone has a seat to get where they're going. And we'll get you more information.
I mean, going from 3 to 5 is, going from 5 to 3 is a dramatic drop.
It is a change. Yes,
So
ma'am.
I want to make sure that we have answers to that also.
Our goal is we get a letter of support in some way, shape, or form from McDill, at least an endorsement that this will meet their needs and they're comfortable.
Great. I thank you all for being patient. This was a very informational board meeting. Had a lot of good information and steps that we need to move forward. Yeah.
Briefly, 55 days to our major schedule change on October 8th. You have the highlight next to you, Mission Max. The routes which are coming down, you'll be hearing a lot from me on how we are ramping up for this. And then our next joint meeting with our Pinellas friends will be September 12th at 2 p.m. And we have gotten this on everyone's calendar. And thank you for your patience on the updates.
Great. Is there any further business? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.